From Tuesday's primaries and runoff elections in a handful of key states, let's bring in NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki at the big board.
And we're going to ask him not only about geography, we're also going to ask him about last night's elections. You can chime in on the Continental Divide if you'd like, but let's start with this Alabama race. It's kind of hard to call this a Trump win because Trump endorsed Brooks, and then his stock collapsed inside the state, so he switched horses midstream.
Yeah, I mean, this was just a saga going back a year, right? Brooks got the endorsement. Brooks lost the endorsement. Brooks found his way into the runoff. Brooks made a very public plea to Donald Trump in the runoff to endorse him, sort of a Hail Mary pass. And then Trump responded to that plea by saying, no, I'm with Katie Britt. And Katie Britt, you can see, wins this thing massively last night. The former chief of staff, Britt, was to Richard Shelby. Richard Shelby, the retiring Republican senator, once upon a time, way back, a Democratic senator, but Britt now emerges the overwhelming favorite to win this seat in November, just given Alabama's political tint. But you could see top to bottom here, only one county, Shelby County. Brooks carries that one barely. Otherwise, this is just a statewide sweep here for Katie Britt in the Republican runoff in Georgia.
So Steve, let me ask you about Alabama for a second there. I mean, some people will say this is a Trump win. I mean, nobody, as you know, nobody is more establishment than Richard Shelby. He is the establishment guy. And the fact that his chief of staff won in Alabama and the fact that that's being considered a victory for Trump, well, that is some pretty, I guess you'd call it thin gruel, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this said nothing about Trump and an affinity for Katie Britt as much as I think it said something about Trump and some contempt he felt for Mo Brooks, because what this essentially did was it's not just the ties to Shelby, although that's something. This also put Trump on the same page as Mitch McConnell, because this is McConnell's candidate in Alabama, too. So Trump and McConnell found themselves on the same side. You know, what happened with Brooks and Trump was a combination of things. You know, the Brooks wasn't polling the way maybe Trump had suspected he would. So maybe he was thought he was jumping off a sinking ship when he withdrew his endorsement. There was also this moment where Brooks basically said that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump. But then he said, but we shouldn't talk about that. We should talk about the future. And that's when Trump put out his statement and said that Mo Brooks had gone, quote, woke.
Let's go to Georgia.
Yeah, so in Georgia, it's an interesting story because, of course, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about some very clear rebukes of Donald Trump. He went after Governor Brian Kemp in the primary. Kemp lost by 50 points. He went after the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. Raffensperger won a crushing victory over Congressman Jody Hice, who was recruited into the race by Trump, all about Trump and his grievances with the 2020 election. Well, Trump had two candidates backed in Republican runoffs last night who also suffered landslide defeats. Here's one of them, Jake Evans. Jake Evans had the Trump endorsement in the 6th district, loses to Rich McCormick 2-1. Then you take a look over here in the 10th district. Vernon Jones, a former Democratic state legislator, had the Trump endorsement, loses 3-1 in this race to Mike Collins. Mike Collins, by the way, he's the son of a former Republican Congressman, Matt Collins. So these are big losses for Trump-backed candidates, although the one difference I would stress between these two defeats for the Trump-backed candidates in what we were talking about in Georgia a few weeks ago, these candidates, Collins here, ran on very Trump-friendly themes. Collins put a video up where he's walking around carrying a gun saying that, hey, I want you to know that if every legal vote had counted in Georgia in 2020, Donald Trump would have won the state. Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. So he ran on very Trump-friendly themes. It was different in that regard than those Kemp and Raffensperger contests. But yes, these are two very Republican districts, and these are two Trump-backed candidates who suffered defeats in the runoffs. And one other, by the way, worth noting here, I think folks nationally have been paying a little bit of attention. The 2nd district in southwest Georgia. This is a seat that's been held by a Democrat, Sanford Bishop, for about 30 years. Because of redistricting, we'll just show you, Biden carried it by a little bit more than 10 points in 2020. This is the kind of district that if this proves to be the wave year Republicans are really hoping it'll be, this could come into play. And national Republicans had really, I think, invested heavily in Jeremy Hunt here, you see, who fell short. This district is about 50% black. Hunt is an Army veteran. They believed he would be a good match for this district, would give them potentially an opportunity. Hunt falls short in this runoff against Chris West. We'll see what West is able to do there, but that's the one district we had a runoff that could be competitive this November in Georgia.
All right, Steve Kornacki, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. And my gosh.
Stunning new testimony about former President Donald Trump's pressure campaign on local officials in key battleground states to overturn the 2020 presidential election results. Public hearing number 4 revealed evidence that Trump was directly involved in trying to put forward alternate slates of Trump electors that he hoped would replace legitimate electors awarded to Joe Biden. The committee detailed many of the ways Trump and his allies tried to strong-arm officials into flipping their state's results. The first key witness the panel heard from was Arizona's State House Speaker, Rusty Bowers, a conservative Republican who delivered powerful testimony about rebuffing efforts by Trump and his attorneys to decertify the results of the election in Arizona. Bowers said there was no evidence of voter fraud, and he would not break his constitutional oath.
I said, look, you are asking me to do something that is counter to my oath when I swore to the Constitution to uphold it, and I also swore to the Constitution and the laws of the state of Arizona, and this is totally foreign as an idea or a theory to me, and I would never do anything of such magnitude without deep consultation with qualified attorneys. And I said, I've got some good attorneys, and I'm going to give you their names. But you're asking me to do something against my oath, and I will not break my oath.
Bowers also told the committee about a phone call he had with Trump and Rudy Giuliani after the election.
To quote the former president, during the conversation, he told me the election was rigged and that I won Arizona, unquote. Did you have such a conversation with the president?
I did have a conversation with the president. That certainly isn't it, but there were parts of it that are true, but there are parts that are not, sir. Anywhere, anyone, anytime has said that I said the election was rigged, that would not be true.
And when the former president in his statement today claimed that you told him that he won Arizona, is that also false?
That is also false.
Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger testified about Trump's obsession with getting the state's election officials to find 11,780 votes. That's the number he needed to overturn Joe Biden's victory in Georgia. Raffensperger explained why Trump lost.
What happened in fall of 2020 is that 28,000 Georgians skipped the presidential race, and yet they voted down ballot in other races. And the Republican congressman ended up getting 33,000 more votes than President Trump. And that's why President Trump came up short. The numbers are the numbers. The numbers don't lie. We had many allegations, and we investigated every single one of them.
Top aide to the Georgia Secretary of State, Gabe Sterling, testified about the challenges he faced trying to debunk voter fraud conspiracies promoted by President Trump and his allies.
For lack of a better word, it was frustrating, but oftentimes I felt our information was getting out, but that there was a reticence of people who needed to believe it because the President of the United States, whom many looked up to and respected, was telling them it wasn't true, despite the facts. And I have characterized at one point, it was kind of like a shovel trying to empty the ocean. And yes, it was frustrating.
Former Attorney General Bill Barr gave the committee private testimony about there being no voter fraud in Georgia, and he says he made sure Trump knew it.
We took a hard look at this ourselves, and based on our review of it, including the interviews of the key witnesses, the Fulton County allegations had no merit. And I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bull. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit.
One key theme from yesterday's hearing, threats of violence from Trump supporters against people who refuse to go along with the illegal scheme to overthrow the election results. Perhaps Tuesday's most powerful witness testimony came from Shay Moss, a Georgia election worker who was falsely accused of participating in a voter fraud scheme. The lies against her were magnified by Trump and Rudy Giuliani. She described suffering from relentless harassment.
A lot of threats, wishing death upon me, telling me that, I'll be in jail with my mother, and saying things like, be glad it's 2020 and not 1920.
Were a lot of these threats and vile comments racist in nature?
A lot of them were racist. A lot of them were just hateful.
Ms. Moss, how has this experience of being targeted by the former president and his allies affected your life?
It's turned my life upside down. I no longer give out my business card. I don't transfer calls. I don't want anyone knowing my name. I don't want to go anywhere with my mom because she might yell my name out over the grocery aisle or something. I don't go to the grocery store at all. I haven't been anywhere at all. I've gained about 60 pounds. I just don't do nothing anymore.
Mika, there's such a tragedy where you have Donald Trump lying about people who are private citizens. In this case, two private citizens who only wanted to serve their country in a pandemic and help the democratic process work. I know when I was involved in politics, I had such great respect for Democrats and Republicans who would dedicate their time to going out and doing exactly what Shay did and what her mother did. And it is heartbreaking. And the thing is, as we described earlier, public figures, they understand that it's part of it. The Arizona speaker, it wasn't easy for him. It wasn't easy for his dying daughter. He did understand, though he was a public figure, even with those threats of violence, didn't make it any less frightening. But he was in the public arena. You could say the same thing about the Georgia Secretary of State. And, in my case personally, of course, when Donald Trump attacked me and accused me of murder, I'm a public figure. Yeah, it caused obviously some security challenges for us. But for the woman's family that was involved in that lie, it shattered them. It has continued to shatter them as these lies continue to spread. And so you look in this case, you look at a private citizen who's not used to the spotlight, who only wanted to help her country out, and having her life shattered and being lied about constantly, not only by Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani, but millions of other people who were spreading that deceitful, hateful lie.
This is
on email, on Facebook, on text, on Twitter. It is contemptible, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
And this is the story of quote, Trump, the grifter, the thief, the corrupt to the core. This is the kind of person who has a cruelty and a callousness that has people like those who followed his cult-like personality or cult and ran to the Capitol with weapons, anything, twist ties, a noose, all in the name of Trump. And you know what? They're going to jail. Trump's at Mar-a-Lago. And then citizens, some who even supported Trump, or local politicians, those who even supported Trump, they're getting harassed. Listen to Shay and her story. She's just a citizen who is trying to help with local elections, and her life has been ruined. Shay's mother, Ruby, was also targeted, including by Trump himself.
We had at least 18,000, that's on tape. We had them counted very painstakingly, 18,000 voters having to do with Ruby Freeman. She's a vote scammer, a professional vote scammer and hustler.
And Ruby talked to the committee in a pre-recorded interview about the impact the attacks have had on her life.
There is nowhere I feel safe. Nowhere. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you? The President of the United States is supposed to represent every American, not to target one, but he targeted me, Lady Ruby, a small business owner, a mother, a proud American citizen who stand up to help Fulton County run an election in the middle of the pandemic.
White House Bureau Chief at Politico and the host of Way Too Early, Jonathan Lemire, is still with us. And let's also bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale, former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General during the Clinton administration, Harry Litman, and former spokesperson for the House Oversight Committee, Kurt Bardella. He's an advisor to the DNC and the DCCC.
Harry, let's begin with you. I'm curious what your take is on yesterday's hearings. Obviously, we've had blockbuster revelations coming out about Mike Pence, about the president. But what was your big takeaway from yesterday?
All these were blockbuster, and again, a very big scheme, and Trump knows about it. Trump knows it's unlawful. For me, though, Joe, the takeaway was all this stuff throughout the country. We've had these set pieces in Washington, D.C. We will return to them tomorrow. But here you saw the actual effect on human lives of the despicable personal qualities of Trump and his minions. Before things have been analogized to a criminal syndicate, this was an actual criminal syndicate with mobs and thugs ready to enforce his will. So all in all, the way it affects the country, the sort of good, bad, and ugly of people standing up and calmly telling the truth, and for that facing the wrath of Trump and untold thousands of frenzied supporters. That's what really drove home to me where we are in the country, not just in Washington.
Kurt Bardella, your take on yesterday's hearing.
Well, Joe, I think that one of the things that stood out to me in all of these proceedings is how seamless this process has been, how choreographed it's been, and what a huge strategic error Kevin McCarthy made by not seating any of his Republican members, allowing Republicans to basically sit this entire thing out. Imagine how different all four of these hearings would have been if you had had the Jim Jordans, the Matt Gaetzes, the typical 5-minute volley back and forth between majority and minority, the Republicans trying to disrupt, distract, take away from the hearing, introduce new narratives, false conspiracy theories, all the things we normally see during normal proceedings like we saw with the confirmation hearings. That's not part of this. We're able to get a full, complete, seamless story from start to finish without any interruption, without any chaos, without any nonsense. And it is a powerful way to present what's going on for the American people. And it was just a massive blunder by Kevin McCarthy to not seat any of his members in this proceeding. I can't believe that he did this. Trump is out of his mind watching this. He can't understand why Kevin did it. It may cost him the speakership down the line.
Hey, Al, yes, to Kurt's point, we have a new interview from the former president this morning expressing his real displeasure that there aren't Republicans on that committee who can defend him. But as we've been saying all morning, yesterday, I'd argue the most powerful of the hearings yet, because it came from this testimony from those who were the subjects who were of these threats, particularly Miss Moss and her mother there in Georgia. It does seem like each hearing is topping the one before. We've got another one tomorrow. What's on tap there?
Yeah, another one tomorrow focusing on the pressure campaign inside the Department of Justice with key officials that were part of those conversations, including the acting Attorney General at the time, as well as his deputies. They can speak to the mindset of the former president as he was trying to install allies atop the Department of Justice. Of course, it makes Congresswoman Liz Cheney's plea that Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, he should come forward. They've had some conversations with him, our sources tell us, but at the same time, they would like to hear from him in a meaningful way in these hearings. I asked her yesterday, as she was leaving the hearing, if it left too many gaps, if they could continue forward on the hearing schedule this next coming week because they still had people that they wanted to hear from. She said that they're going to continue the conversations with Cipollone, leaving the real meat and the crux of my question unanswered here, because what's always been true, Jonathan, is you and I have talked about this, the fact that they are laying out a public narrative while they are still learning new information. They are asking Ginny Thomas to come and talk to them. They have new footage now and conversations from Ivanka Trump because of that documentarian who was with the former president and his allies in the days and weeks before January 6th. They're getting a lot of new information, and the question is, how are they able to balance that, moving forward with public hearings, but also making sure that they have all of the information that they could possibly want. I will say, though, in terms of yesterday, the real moment for me was when Rudy Giuliani apparently said to them in the context of trying to find these votes and find some way to bolster the conspiracy theories that they were coming up with, where he said that they had lots of theories, but they just don't have the evidence. I think that's pretty much the banner for what the Trump campaign strategy was in the aftermath of losing the election.
Harry, how important would it be to have Cipollone testify before the committee? What would you want to find out?
Well, he had repeated conversations where he said, this is unlawful, you can't do it with Trump personally, so it really drives that home. I think as in other instances, they do have it in equivalent form, but it was that was a hard one from Cheney at the end, calling him out directly. They know about conversations that they'll have to do secondhand. Cipollone would give it straight. Cipollone's a Barr guy, always has been, and just as Barr parted company with Trump at the end, Cipollone is a guy who can say in the flesh and blood, we knew, I'm the White House counsel, we knew this had no legal basis whatsoever.
Kurt Bardella, let's talk about the pacing of these hearings. I think it's fascinating that the committee is actually having to slow things down. They're getting so much information. I mean, you can talk about the political side of it. Every hearing seems to be a blockbuster hearing. There are headlines that could last a week. I think they've got a bigger issue, though, as far as pacing, and they're learning so much in these hearings. They've learned about this new documentary filmmaker who followed Donald Trump around January the 6th. They're trying to get more evidence to make sure they don't get out ahead of themselves. But the pacing, I take it that you agree with the pacing of these hearings, that it's better not to just keep it.
Let it breathe.
Let it breathe, not compress it so much that you miss some evidence, that the American public miss some evidence.
Yeah, we're seeing from this committee, and it's very refreshing, actually, in real time, making adjustments based on how this is playing out there with the American people, based on the information they're getting. I remember talking to people inside the committee before the hearing started, and they were prepared for the possibility that because what we were going to see was so compelling, that they would get an avalanche of people coming forward with more information, with new information, that these would extend beyond June. When they initially announced the hearings for June, they did so saying this is just the beginning. This is not the be-all, end-all. The investigation just doesn't end with the last hearing in June. And now what we're seeing is they understand, and they're learning from lessons from the past. During impeachment, remember, we had like 3 hearings a week, one after the other. Nothing was able to resonate. Nothing was able to sink in. They're not going to make that same mistake twice. They're going to space this out. They're going to let the information breathe. They're going to let the American people digest it, let the media absorb it, and let themselves have the time to put forward the best presentation possible. They are not going to rush this. And I think that the only thing I would change about yesterday, honestly, is I would have put it on prime time.
Former spokesperson for the House Oversight Committee, Kurt Bardella, thanks very much for being on this morning. And former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman, thank you as well. Breaking overnight, the most significant gun safety legislation in decades is a step closer to becoming law. The bipartisan group of senators working on the bill released the text of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and it's already passed its first hurdle in the Senate, with 14 Republicans joining Democrats to vote in favor of moving forward with the bill. The measure expands child and family mental health services, strengthens background checks for buyers under the age of 21, bolsters crisis intervention programs, and offers red flag grants to states. It also closes the so-called boyfriend loophole to prevent domestic abusers from accessing guns. Ali Vitali, what are the next steps? Is there anything that could get in the way of this passing?
Look, I never like to say that things are over until they're officially over, but at the same time, yesterday was the key hurdle that people were talking about, needing to get that bill text out, because these senators set July 4th, and before they go out of town for that holiday, as their arbitrary deadline on when they wanted to get this all wrapped up by. They needed to get this bill text out. Initially, it would have been better for Monday. We were hearing it could have come on Monday. It did end up coming late yesterday afternoon, though. It allowed them to stay late at work last night, actually vote on the first procedural step to get onto this bill. The Senate could try to clear this by Friday, we're told. And then, of course, it's up to the House. We know that those Democratic margins are there. In conversations with Democrats that I've been having, they've been looking forward to this legislation, not because it has everything that they want in it, but to the conversation that you were having before with Senator Chris Murphy, the lead Democrat negotiating this bill. This is the most significant gun legislation that they've had in nearly 3 decades. The fact that the Senate was able to come together on this, at times it looked like it was going to fall apart over things like the boyfriend loophole that you mentioned. They were able to get this text down. The refrain that I heard from every source over the course of these last few weeks was the devil will be in the details. It seems like at this point the details are settled and they're able to move on in true bipartisan fashion, because frankly I can't remember the last time that I saw a piece of legislation like this get 64 votes in a Senate like this one. So pretty significant here in terms of both the bipartisan negotiating as well as the bill itself, the substance.
That's pretty amazing. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitali, thank you very much.